Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
It's The In Show, Australia's only show dedicated to innovation from Adelaide, Australia and across the globe.
It's David Grice and Troy Sincock. Now, this show began being all about innovation, but you could say it's pretty inspiring too. So perhaps it's about inspiration, David.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what I love, though, is this show is really about telling people stories. Not just their business stories, but the stories of their lives as well and how they got, through their journey.
Yeah, it's amazing what people have been through to try and make life better for other people, and this woman is no exception. But it's happened in the most peculiar way. She started with a very traditional occupation, and she now finds herself at the forefront of contemporary communication.
Yeah, Troy, we're talking to Leanne Isaacson. She began as a traditional farmer, and she now calls herself a digital farmer.
Certainly does. She's Australia's most connected LinkedIn woman, so Leanne is a connection creator, really. Have you made this all up, Leanne?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
a self-made woman.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. Probably connecting is something that I've always done, and I build connections really easily, and yeah, it just comes naturally.
Tell me about what that means to you in terms of building connections, because do you see it as different to networking and facilitating?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like networks... Your networks are really powerful, and I've had a very good friend once that said your net worth is equivalent to the size of your networks, and which is a really interesting sort of scenario. And I think sort of over the years I've had lots of different jobs, and I think coming from a rural community, you're connected to so many people and on different levels, and so that certainly is something that I grew up being in that sort of situation. But yeah, I think your actual connections and the relationships that you build are different to networking. It's on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. So are you still farming? Is that still part of your life?
Oh, look, it's probably a little bit of a tender subject at the moment. Our farm has just actually sold in December, so that settles at the end of February. So that's sort of the final chapter in that part of my life. So it's an interesting, I sort of sit here and think, well, I've still got such an affinity with agriculture and at rural communities, but I live in the city, so what am I? So it's an interesting, and probably not just for me, but like a lot of people that come from rural areas, and you're identified with what you do, and sometimes it's quite often a piece of dirt, but that's not necessarily, you can still be connected to it whether you're there or not.
And is that, I presume, after so many years, that's just a really emotional moment for you to have to let go as well?
It's probably been a couple of years, so it's been a bit of a gradual shift, but it's been interesting. I mean, we originally sort of had properties out in the Mallee, and had 2,500 acres, and then moved closer to the city and bought some more, and then sold some, and so it almost went from having 2,500 to 270, and you sort of feel like a bit of a hobby farmer. But so it's been an interesting transition.
Yeah.
What did you love about farming?
What do I love about farming? The space, the community, the animals, the land, the landscape. Sometimes not quite so good. Just the whole. I mean, I grew up. I was born, on a farm, and pretty much apart from living in Adelaide, sort of for about 10 years, farming was where I was. Just the community and the connections and the opportunities.
When you grew up into that, were you ever at a point where you wanted to reject it because it wasn't a choice you made, but rather something that you were born into?
No, I was probably lucky enough. So I came to Adelaide to boarding school, and so I got a job and worked in Adelaide for probably about 7 or 8 years, and made a choice to go back. And I always said that I was lucky enough to have the growing up there, but then the experience in the city with a couple of different careers, and then I chose to go back. So I always said that I was, and for me that, with young people, especially, growing up, there's a lot of pressure on, especially young sons to stay, on the farm. I mean, I was one of 3 girls, so I didn't have, we sort of didn't have that same pressure. But, I always said, look, let them go and bring the experience and come back rather than trying. So, yeah, I I didn't feel the pressure to stay, but I chose to go back.
How did you feel moving between the two worlds? Because often the two don't ever meet, do they? You're either considered a city person or, someone from the land. Did you find it simple to go from, background of farming to then in the city and back again? And have you found people around you see any restrictions in making those types of moves?
No, I don't think so. I know when I was living in the city, I used to go back and play sport back in our, so I used to go back to the country, every Saturday and play netball. So I sort of maintained that sort of, in my late teens, and that was an interesting transition because I wasn't living there. It was, well, are you local or you're not? Or so that was probably harder during that time. But going back, I mean, there were, I had a lot of friends that sort of were still there, and some married and went back as well. So I was probably lucky that married and having kids at a time that there were, a lot of younger, my age people as well. So, yeah, it was good.
And I suppose over the years too, you would have seen a lot of transition in the way farming is done and how technology starts to come in to that sort of space. What sort of is the most significant thing that you've seen over the last sort of, 5 or 10 years in that space?
I've seen a lot. Like as far as online stuff, like I actually went online in 1997. I think I was the first in our whole region to get internet, and so back then back in 97, 98 it was dial up and not particularly fast. And if I needed to send an email, I had, if there was a short in the neighbour's electric fence, I'd have to get my husband to go over and turn the electric fence off so I could actually send an email, just stuff like that. And then I, got a satellite dish. So it was satellite in and still out through the phone line, and then I got the two-way satellite. So I was I got a job with a government department back in, I think it was 2000, teaching people how to use the internet. And, back then, and I look now and think, God, how clunky it was. Google didn't exist and, all of that stuff. So, from a technology perspective, and in 2004, I was lucky enough to win a scholarship, like a flexible learning scholarship, which allowed me to trial some stuff, with technology in the rural areas. And there was a lot of equipment at the time in hospitals and mainly hospitals, like video conference equipment that really wasn't being used. And I thought, well, what could we do? It'd be really good to actually get the equipment being used for fun, then the actual technology would become irrelevant and the learning would be the focus. And so we ran wine appreciation via video conference. So I managed to get a winemaker from the southeast on board, and so we ran some wine appreciation.
Wish I'd known about that. I would have been in.
It was a hoot, and as part of that scholarship, so we actually did floristry as well via video conference. I've probably got that many stories on that, but as part of that scholarship was I did some work over in Wales. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be a hoot to actually run a wine appreciation video conference from Australia to Wales? And that's what we did.
Wow.
So that was pretty, that was a lot of fun. And I think, at the time it was really just to show that how it could work. But, I was at the Swansea University. I think there was 10 professors, sitting in this room. We had a television. So Tony came on the screen. But what was interesting is the actual people there didn't know much about wine. So they actually learnt. So like I said, I've got lots of stories, sitting with my laptop on the ute, on the front seat of the ute doing a webinar following behind the cows going between two farms.
What was it about you, getting the internet first and that kind of thing? You obviously had a real thirst for what was coming next and, a deep passion for getting connected despite your remoteness to some things.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I don't know how that happened. I wouldn't have a clue. But I think it was really a case of having people connected regardless of where they are. And so for me, that was, we were running, back then they weren't called webinars, they were called online, just online rooms. And so I was facilitating the Australian Women in Ag across Australia, their committee meetings through online meeting rooms, and a lot of farmers, we had, sort of farmers that had coaches, working on their cash flows and things. And so using these online rooms, they could actually share their Excel, their cash flow and being able to see the results straight away. So it was about better connections and better productivity and things like that. So I don't know how it happened, but it became my passion.
How did that affect the farming experience for you?
I mean, probably from our own farming experience, we probably didn't do a lot differently. It was probably my passion for education, and again, that was just something I always say I must have woken up one day and hit my head and developed that passion, because I never grew up, wanting to be an educator. But that really just became my passion. And so I think it was about, creating opportunities and, how can we create them the best way that we can, given distance.
Mm-hmm. And you've brought that farming into the digital world now, haven't you? And so you call yourself a digital farmer. Tell us what that means.
Well, it was probably, I was having a discussion with, so I've been actually running an online show myself, and the guy that's producing it's in Baltimore in Maryland. And we were having this conversation one day. I said, well, I don't know. I said, when the farm sells, what am I? I said, am I a farmer, or what am I? And he said, Leanne, with the way that you actually do stuff, he said, you're a digital farmer. He said, you plant the seed and then, you nurture it and you watch it grow, and sometimes things will grow faster than others. And it's really about, just the whole sort of farming concept. Yeah, so that's sort of how it started.
Yeah, and bringing that into the digital realm, right? And so is that you helping businesses or growing businesses, or sowing the seeds and connecting people so they create stuff, or?
Oh, look, it's all sorts of different things, really. Probably one of the things that I'm really good at is seeing a big picture and joining pieces of the puzzle together. And so I'm always thinking, even when I'm talking to someone, I'll think, now who do I know, or what do I know? And it's not necessarily always a person. It might be, well, hang on, I know that there's a piece of software out there that could actually help you. And that's just how my mind works. So it's really, helping people either connect to other people that might be potential clients, or being able to do things better, or, so that's sort of how I do it.
What's the most fulfilling part of that for you?
It's meeting people and actually building relationships and putting people together. I think that's probably the most fulfilling part. And seeing, I had a friend of mine who, he was in Colorado, and it sort of created an animation, and it was animated by some creators in the UK. And he said to me one day, he said, Leanne, can you find me a lawyer in London that specialises in media entertainment?
Goodness.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can do that. So, okay. So, I did some really specific searches in my LinkedIn network and looked at profiles, and there was one lady in particular. I thought, I think she's the one. And she wasn't, a direct connection of mine. She was a second level. And so I just sent her a connection, or I think I sent her a connection request just saying, hi, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is what we've got. Would you be interested in? And she accepted the connection request straight away, and I put the two of them together. So, I can usually pick the sorts of words and to when I'm sending someone a request or anything like that, to be able to be real, be human. And that's probably what it is. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So you've discovered the way that you communicate is the key to connecting people.
Correct.
Isn't that amazing? I've learnt so much in the last year, and particularly through doing the in-show. We've had the opportunity to speak to some extraordinary people, you being one of them. And, what I've discovered is so often people don't ask a question because they're assuming what the answer is going to be. And it's amazing, and it appears to work that way with the stories that you've related. When you give a person the opportunity to make a contribution, there are people that work in businesses at all levels just waiting to be asked to be able to, do a good deed, and they just never get asked. And so it's a matter of someone asking.
I think, and I think that is one of the things. I always used to say, with the, a lot of the technology stuff, at the end of the day, as long as no one's going to die, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? It's just not going to work. And if it doesn't work, you don't throw it away. You go, okay, well, it didn't work like that, so how can we change it, and how can we make it better to work in the way, to help? So I think, that's probably always been my, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. I get this is, is this very much who you are, but you must have, when you were starting out doing this stuff, what lessons have you learnt along the way? Because there would have been times when you communicated in a certain way, didn't quite get the result that you wanted. Has there been anything that you can really take out of that experience where you look at yourself, you review where you were when you began this journey to where you are now? Are there things that are coming easier to you now that weren't in the beginning?
I think I probably always, if I was asking or fighting for a cause, or, if it was an organisation or a community or something like that, I was fearless, absolutely fearless. I could ring the president and ask for something. Doing it for my own business has been much, much bigger challenge, because then it's sort of, there's stuff that plays in your head from, what if, what if they say no, and what if this, and so that's been a really interesting transition from when I went from, working within a community organisation to then going into my own business.
And how do you deal with that? That fear or that doubt that you have. Have you got skills that you just you say, no, I'm not going to feel like that? And is there something that switches for you?
Well, I've probably got a couple of coaches in my world that can kick me up the bum when I'm having one of those days. So there's a guy that his name's Taki Moore. He's just an amazing coach. And I was watching like a Facebook Live that he did, and he does some really, really impromptu stuff. So he's walking on the beach in Sydney, and he said, right, well, I thought I'd just, do this. And so he's got, a stick, and he's drawn this thing in the sand. And he said, right, so when you're feeling that you're just not quite maybe there, he said, you just have to ignore what's in your own head and step into the belief that others have in you. And that's something that just sits in my head, because, I think all of us, we have a little voice on our shoulder saying, well, what if we're not good enough, or what if something goes wrong, and you have everyone else around you saying, well, look, you know how to do that with your eyes shut. So it's step into the belief that others have in you.
That's wonderful advice too, isn't it, David? Because, on the In Show, we've spoken to so many people who've really, for a period, really tried to do it alone, and then have discovered that it's nigh on impossible. They might have the idea, but, some of these incredible visionaries, it's impossible to know everything. So you need to take people along for the ride. But that idea of having the people there alongside of you, whether they're involved in the business itself or just really care for you, and that sense being created that you can't ever fall no matter what you're stepping into, would be such a valuable thing for some of the tight spots we've heard innovators in, where they're putting all their money on the line. They're in some tough situations.
Yeah, I think it is something that over the years, and that's the value of creating teams and building really deep relationships with others, and I think probably especially within like small business and innovation, like I think women tend to probably do it better than what, dare I say it, that what blokes do, as far as like actually building each other up, and I think that was one of the things that coming out of community. We were just always so used to, like community centres and like all working together and sharing knowledge and resources, and I remember, stepping out of that into my own business, and I said to someone one day, well, how do you do it? And it was as if I'd just asked her for $1 million. Like it was, God, I'm not going to tell you that. Like, so I think, like within business, there's, there's the element of, well, you can't sort of give your competitors, some of your insights, because what if they steal them? But at the end of the day, everyone's different, and look, there's however many billion people in the world, and it's a bit like LinkedIn. Like there's 550 million on LinkedIn, and people will say, well, you don't want to tell any of the other LinkedIn people how you do stuff. And I said, why? There's plenty of business for everyone to go around, and someone might like someone else, and, no one ever knows everything about everything. So it's about, and I think that's one of the other things that I've always realised is that in the way I look at things, everyone knows something about something. And I might know something about having a laptop on the front seat of the ute and connecting via wireless, whereas someone else might know a different way. So, I think it's about sharing, just sharing insights and also taking ideas from other businesses and being able to apply it to your own business. And that's probably what over the years I've spent a lot of time listening to podcasts and. Think, now I wonder whether that would work, in my business. And, like the farming business that we established, which was selling lucerne hay and cereal hay to the horse industry, I marketed that totally online. And, people would look at me and say, you can't, for a start, you can't sell, some sort of farming products online. But, I did it. And so I think it's just switching the mentality to go, okay, so what parts of that can we actually take and how can we apply that to our own businesses?
So you're the most connected LinkedIn woman in Australia.
Yeah.
Is that something that you sort of set out to do or are you just working it hard to try
No, I actually joined LinkedIn 10 years ago. In October, I joined in October 2007 and I don't really quite know how I came across it. I think it was as part of sort of like the flexible learning scholarship that I'd done. Like I remember back then, Twitter had just sort of come out, and I remember listening to, these people talk about, that they were tweeting what they had for dinner. And I think, why on earth would you want to do that? Like, really? And so I think, sort of like, so that's sort of the space that I'd always been in, going, okay, well, I wonder how that works. And so I joined LinkedIn in 2007 and I'd sort of built my network a little bit, didn't use much. But in 2012, I sort of went to a summit over in Melbourne and there was a guy from the US that was talking about LinkedIn and, growing your network. And because that's probably how I've always lived my own, I've always been a networker, and so it just was something that just naturally came. I thought, okay, and so I made a conscious decision that I would connect with anyone that wanted to connect with me. And probably back in 2012, it was a bit easier to build connections faster. I think sort of in 2012, I added 7,000 connections that year, and then did for a couple of years. So it was a conscious decision that I made. And, at the time, people would say, well, you can't connect with anyone you don't know. And I think, well, what harm can it do? What's the worst thing that can happen? It just grew over, a number of years. And I sat down one day and worked out, I've actually got nearly 30,000 connections, and you can't go over 30,000 as actual first level connections. Nothing like first world problems. God, how am I going to deal with that? But so at the moment, I've got I think 1,400 connection requests sitting in my inbox, and so I have to delete some to be able to accept the new ones. So
the people that are sort of last on the bus are the ones getting filtered the hardest.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, if you've sent me a connection request, you better just actually send a message with it because sometimes it gets lost. But as I said, at the moment it's not. I think for a long time I didn't actually tell anyone because sort of the people that I was working with, didn't understand LinkedIn and think, well, who cares? Why would you need that many? You can't possibly know that many people. I've probably heard just about every line. But I've got connections across all across the world in all sorts of industries, which for what I do now as far as saying, okay, well, yep, I can probably find you, 20 leads of insurance brokers in such and, in a particular place. So that's what I tend to use mine for. It's been an interesting journey, and I mean LinkedIn's changed so much.
And so it sounds like you're actually you're using your network in LinkedIn to help others.
That's pretty much what I do.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
It's pretty outstanding when you think about that.
Well, it's absolutely amazing, very impressive, and so great to see someone just creating a life that they really love and also connecting others in the process. I think that's, incredibly exciting. Australia's most connected LinkedIn woman, Leanne Isaacson, thanks so much for joining us on The In Show.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, David.
That was Leanne Isaacson, Australia's most connected LinkedIn woman. What an impressive lady, David.
Oh, I just love just the way she's just so open and just able to just share with us, all of the struggles and how she gets through things, but just those inspiring words that come out as well.
It really is who she is rather than the talent that she has. And in fact, it's almost innate for Leanne, isn't it? Like, she's such a relatable, approachable woman.
She is. And I love the fact that she just wants to help people.
Yeah.
I want to find a lawyer, she'll connect me to a lawyer. I want to find a musician in Singapore, she'll find me one. It's crazy.
And somehow she's really built the value in that too, which is, even more extraordinary. Now, tomorrow we're going to find out what's in. And, often when we speak to someone about an innovation, you think that they're going to talk about their world. But if you're in the space of innovation, it's incredible what you see happening around you, even if it doesn't directly affect you.
Well, look, tomorrow we're talking with Kirk Drage. Now, he's the founder of Leap Sheep, who are basically a company that's dedicated to helping startups. Kirk is the entrepreneur in residence here in the Adelaide City Council, but he's going to talk about autonomous vehicles.
Fantastic. That's next on the In Show podcast.
The In Show Interview. Subscribe to the In Show podcast on iTunes. A Dave and the Beanstalk production.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.